Welcome to Spectrum. I'm Alexander Carpenter, and I'm honored to be joined by Chigemezi, Kendra, and Sduduzo from around the world as we continue another global Adventist conversation. Thank you all for joining us today. Really quickly, why don't you tell us where you are right now in the world and your first feeling as you're reflecting back on the General Conference session? Kendra?
So I am here from Boston, Massachusetts, and my first feelings are, I don't know, over it maybe. Yeah, that might be it.
Great, over it. Chigemezi, where are you and how are you feeling?
Yes, I am in Germany, in East Germany. My first feeling is not impressed, somehow dumbfounded, speechless, perhaps.
Wow, I like this. Pastor Blose, where are you and how are you feeling?
So I'm in South Africa, on the great continent of Africa. Disappointed. That's the word, disappointed.
Well, good. We've assembled a support group of the great disappointed here. Let's talk a little bit about that. What's making you disappointed? Whoever wants to kick that off, feel free.
So I think, Blase, you make a good point when you talk about disappointment. And I think for myself, I think it's been a long journey of disappointment that this particular GC session was not anything that was surprising. I've had an experience where I've seen what this beast is, and it continues to act according to its nature. And I think it's unsurprising, which of itself is a sad statement, right?
Sorry, just to jump in there, Alex, and because I've been seeing quite a lot of these sentiments on social media, where whenever I express this disappointment, the rebuttal or the response has been, "What did you expect?" Right? This has been a long time coming, and it's been sort of building up over the last, decade or so. And this is exactly what happens, when we allow some of the things that we've allowed to take place and to happen over the last couple of years. This is sort of like a culmination. This didn't just happen at GC session, but it's been something that's been building and has been carefully orchestrated, right, and crafted to sort of manifest in the way that it did at GC session. And it's not to say that I was naive, about the session, but I really did have hope. And I suppose that's what disappointment is. When some of the problematic and regressive statements were shared and just the ramifications of those seemed lost to the delegates that were in attendance, and how some of those violent sort of sentiments that were shared resonated with so many of the delegates that were in the hall, right? Sort of culminating in them clapping and sort of offering a round of applause. So it wasn't just about the speakers that were on the podium, but also just a response to some of those things. And maybe we'll go through some of them. And for me, that sort of said, we can't hide anymore behind the whole notion of, or the cop-out of, this is not the church, it's just certain individuals, this is not the church that's doing this, it's just particular individuals. No, that is the church, because they spoke, nobody called them out, the church clapped, and those are delegates that were sent by the churches, those are people that were elected by us, they represent us, they are us. That was scary to observe, but like I said, crushing as well at the same time. Yeah.
Chigemezi, what do you think?
Of course, there are many things persons and people would say you can agree with and you don't agree with. For me, that was not the issue, right? Because we are all human beings. We come from different places. We've had several or different socialization. I was not impressed, though there are a lot of people who were impressed, coming from my background, and perhaps even some people who several places in the world. But I was not impressed because, and maybe I'm just trying to put the word impression in a good way, so that I don't so that I don't go overboard. but I couldn't just understand, the denomination starts up with young persons. These young persons, start a movement, and then they start a denomination, and then they grow old and die, and then other people take over, inheriting this same denomination, this same movement, and then they create dynasties, right? And it's as if they have to stay, or and then the denomination is growing, in the global south. Where are those who? Where's the majority of the church? Where are they? Where are they? Right? And of course, where's the representation that we all want to claim?
In 3 years, we'll get a chance to relive this, and maybe there'll be some change. Kendra, there are great examples of things not changing. One of them is that the elected leadership of the General Conference contains one woman out of 23 executive officers. If it turns into some sort of monarchical dynasty, is going to probably ruin the church.
Yeah, I want to speak to that, and I want to speak a little bit backwards too. I think I have a fuller picture of my grief that I can kind of chime in here. I think, a lot of these things touch, I think, all of us very personally. I think we all at some point, we are in a voluntary organization because we have hope, or we have wanted to live according to certain ideals. I can say that the GC session 2015 for me was like probably one of the worst times of my life. Things that were happening interpersonally as well as at the GC itself. When there is, I guess only way to say it is like, when something is happening to you or your people, right? And nobody speaks up, or the voice that tries to speak up is silenced. And then we continue to move through the years, trying to enact that silence, right? There was all these compliance committees of trying to make sure women aren't pastors, and trying to rebuild the theology around it, try to never make it come up again in GC session. We just want it squashed. We're going to refocus on mission. We're going to do that. And then that continued kind of persecution against the LGBTQ community, the continued colonialism of the church in other areas. It feels very tone deaf. And as we know, like Ted Wilson doesn't like to answer questions. He doesn't want to talk to people. He doesn't want to be held accountable. And unless we're willing to change the system and say, this is inherently for an organization this large, this doesn't work anymore. This is damaging. This allows for corruption, especially since this person gets to nominate other people into their positions and really hold power in a way that we have lost it. In that sense, if we're not able to, one, know who's qualified, everyone sitting here is a qualified person in some ways to lead this church. But if the only way that we're going to move forward is through nominating committees with people who have never heard of them, then I don't see how there can be a change.
I see you nodding in agreement there.
Yeah, I mean, almost at bars as Kendra was talking, precisely because I think it also, just the way we do elections, and you mentioned something, critical there of how this is a systemic problem, it's a systemic issue. So even if you were to say get rid of Ted Wilson, you still have this problem persisting and enduring, because it's one of the rebuttals that I sort of bring up whenever someone says, why don't we have, or when are we having an African president at the GC, right? I'm like, you guys don't learn anything. We had Barack Obama, in America, and America was seen as this sort of like post-racial society because of Obama's ascension to the White House. But looking at the polarities that you find in American society presently, you kind of see that, actually, that wasn't really necessarily as glorious a change as we thought it would be. Because the problem wasn't just the figure, the face of the country, just as the problem is not the face of the church. It's a systemic problem, and it allows him to sort of grab hold of this power and then build this dynasty. He's learned how to play the system, right? And I remember chatting to a friend. I said, Ted Wilson is we call him a political animal, right? But he's a child of the institution. He knows the politics of the institution. He grew up in the halls of power within the church, and he's got this. You see it in this sort of entitlement to the church. This is this is his family's church, the Wilson Church. He's got that entitlement that he feels he needs to protect it. He feels he needs to lead it and drive it in a particular direction. That doesn't come from it's not a God-given mission. It's something that he's grown up with. So that is a very systemic problem in that his length of time and experience in church administration hasn't taught him how to be a good leader, but has taught him how to play the politics of church leadership quite well.
Would you mind just talking about, in your own doctoral research, you explore the tensions between kind of older forms of worship, and newer forms of worship?
Oh, yes. So my research, perhaps I would just buttress a bit, explore the tensions in Adventist worship services for those who would like to, who claim that they would like to worship, just like it has always been. So the missionary heritage, whatever the missionaries brought in to Adventist, to Nigerian Adventism, or establishing Nigerian Adventism, and then this contestation from some other Adventists who would say, well, yes, this thing has always been there, but why don't we tweak things a bit? Why don't we worship differently? Why don't we become Nigerian? Letting the Pentecostal praxis take control, well, not take control, but being relevant, and letting Adventist worship localize in this setting. And so this contestation is there. So there's looking back and then being relevant, and of course looking forward. But the the thing is that both trajectories are valid, by the way, because we can't look forward or understand the present without the past. Also as a missionary historian, this is what I can say. But this fetish that Stu spoke about, with the past, or this over pampering of the past, cannot help us to really move forward. I still personally hope that things will change. I still believe that there's a good future, because even as Adventists, all of us, this is one of our core ideology. So we sing, we have this hope that burns within our hearts, and there are churches that sing this, every Sabbath after worship, right? Hope in the coming of the Lord. Now, hoping in the coming of the Lord can be theoretical, but this hope, practically means that if we hope for something, we have to work for it.
Well, I'm glad you're talking about systemic change. Kendra, you have an MDiv. Do you have some pastoral reflections on what you are feeling and what you witnessed here?
It's one of those things where, I think Blase brought up something about a personal fetish that people have with the past. And I think everyone's entitled, to go to Comic-Con or to have that thing that they love, right? There are some people who want to do church that way, but there has to be a way to separate those who do not want to do church that way anymore, right? If that's the Adventism, they want the 1844 Adventism, absolutely have it, take it, enjoy it. Those are the things that make you happy in life, right? But the problem that we have is this codependency that the church despises individuality, right? Everything is about compliance, uniformity. Adventism is a franchise. There are people who did not perform well at the seminary, right? performed at a lower academic level who are now our pastors because they fit more, they're more uncomplicated in how they fit into Adventism. But I think people who were desirous to be more complicated and nuanced, they find themselves having a hard time finding a church or fitting into what Adventism currently is.
If I could say something to this, permit me, please, Alex.
Yeah, please.
So I think I like this idea of just letting people, live their life. I pastor what a traditional church in Berlin at the moment. What a lot of people would say is a conservative church, and I quickly discovered that this is how they want to do church. So this idea of Paul saying, "I want to be Greek to the Greeks and Jew to the Jew," just kept playing in my mind. But one thing that helped me to also accept this thing, that this is how they want to do church. They want to be traditional. They want to sing hymns this way. They want to pray this way. They want to worship this way. Was that in the research that I did in Nigeria, it got clear to me that what Kendra is saying, people are different, and because they're different, they want to worship God differently. We cannot be monocultural, even in a local church.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing up this blueprint idea that we have to fight against. You've been in many roles in the denomination. What are you, as you're sort of reflecting on some of the comments here, how have you seen that play out, and what are some specific ways you've seen of sort of maybe trying to relax people about the idea of being more diverse?
Yeah, I love Kendra and Chigemezi's contributions. They're also, I'm finding them quite therapeutic, and sort of like a sort of relief, provide a sort of relief for me as well. That it's okay to be different. It's okay to not assimilate, right? It's okay to not culturally migrate in order to fit into this culture of Adventism. And so Adventism is scammy. And I use that word intentionally, right? It's like a scam artist who doesn't acknowledge and doesn't present who they really are, so that they can sort of conceal what they really are about, as they disrobe you of what you are and who you are. Sort of like, not just disrobe you, but just extract what you are, remove it from you, so that you can assimilate into this thing. Before you know it, there's a culture that wasn't really presented as a culture that I'm now part of, and I don't even know how I became part of this. So I call it scammy. It's how scam artists work. And I wrote a thread this morning just reflecting on that, on Galatians 3:28, right? There's neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male or female. And how we appropriate that text, for example, as an Adventist church, is almost like we are the darlings of that text. So the text is talking to us as being that community where there's neither Greek nor Jew, slave or free, male or female. And wherever there are transactional sort of elements to whatever we do, you will never find authenticity, honesty, compassion, right? And realness in the way that we do things. So we become very good actors, right? Where I can speak about in front of the church, about unity, but at the same time, I've just pushed a whole session to, approve all the slews of amendments that power, and silence diversity of voices. So there's this double speak, but it's tolerated and it's acceptable as part of the church, and it's not called out for the hypocrisy that it is, because we are very performative, right? In the church. Remember one session, after a caucus, and I just overheard a couple of guys talking about, removing one of the officers, and in very unkind terms, in very unkind words. And when they finally achieved this, right, the very guy leading the conversation, in this caucus to remove this gentleman, was the first guy to go up on the stage and pray with the victim of their plotting, right? And it was seen as such a beautiful gesture of, spiritual, but that's what comes with that dishonesty, this performative, superficial spirituality, pseudo-spirituality that hides and gaslights victims of its violence, but then also hides the monstrosity of its perpetrators.
Wow. Well, you're preaching there. Thank you for that. Let's go around and think about one thing that you think needs to change by the 2025 GC session.
Well, I would start with having, of course, more women up there, and it's not just because I love my mom and speak about her a lot, but just because the fact that in reality, women are better leaders than men. I'm sorry, but this is just yeah. It's also in the Bible,
Great. Kendra.
I think I'm going to harp on something Blase said because it's so core to my own experience right now, which is, this sense of self that I think is often lost in Adventism. And there are some, I would call it cultish practices where the loss of self-identity is a part of the requirement for salvation. If I would change one thing, it would be take care of our own house first, because I think there's a lot of unhealth present. And everybody sitting here, I'm afraid what will happen. Obviously, both of you have outgrown the church in so many ways as how it currently exists, right? And so where will there be space for you in the future?
Pastor Blose.
Yeah, there's so much. I've been rattling through, a couple of terms in my head. Belonging, right? It's a reflection that's been heavy in my heart, right, over the last couple of days, where we often talk about belonging in terms of us finding resonance with a particular community. So I belong to the Adventist Church, and what I mean by that is that there are a lot of things within the Adventist Church that I resonate with, that I agree with. But what I'm not saying, and what I cannot trace, is if I really belong to the Adventist Church in the sense of how the Adventist Church holds me in my wholeness, in my fullness. Does the church accept me? Do I belong to the church, right? So it's my church.
Thank you. I really appreciate the honesty that you each brought to this discussion, and I am so honored to hear your thoughts, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with the rest of our audience. So thanks for taking the time to really speak from your heart and from your mouth to God's ears.